New York City, in the early 20th century, was a breeding ground for organized crime, a place where power was won in blood and loyalty was often a death sentence. Among the 5 ruling mafia families, one would become infamous not only for its strength, but for an internal war that shattered the underworld's code of secrecy. The Bonanno family, founded by the cunning and ambitious Joseph Bonanno, would go on to create one of the longest-lasting dynasties in the Mafia's history. However, their legacy would not just be one of power, it would also be one of betrayal, publicized chaos, and the ultimate disgrace of being the first family to see its boss break omertà, the sacred vow of silence. Not only that, but the Bonannos were the only New York Mafia family ever kicked out of the commission, a public sign of their declining reputation in the underworld. Unlike the other crime families that gained notoriety through public displays of violence and bold assassinations, the Bonanno family operated in the shadows. Joseph Bonanno, a man with deep Sicilian roots, built his empire through a quiet but iron-fisted approach, making his organization one of the wealthiest in the New York underworld. His business empire extended into legitimate fronts, including cheese companies, funeral homes, garment businesses, and real estate, allowing him to launder money with remarkable efficiency. But his empire was not immune to internal strife. What started as an orderly, disciplined family under his rule spiraled into one of the bloodiest internal wars in Mafia history, a conflict that played out in broad daylight, with gunfire ringing through the streets of Brooklyn and Queens. The so-called Banana War saw rival factions of the Bonanno family engage in shootouts so poorly executed that in one instance, a group of armed men fired on their rivals, yet miraculously missed every shot. And while Bonanno himself lived longer than any other boss of his time, he would not escape the consequences of his ambition. Born in 1905 in Castellammarese del Golfo, Sicily, Joseph Bonanno grew up in a world where honor, family, and organized crime were intertwined. As a child, he witnessed firsthand the rise of the Sicilian Mafia, known as the Cosa Nostra, and by the time he was a teenager, he had already been exposed to the power dynamics of the criminal underworld. When Benito Mussolini launched his war against the Sicilian Mafia in the 1920s, Bonanno, like many others, fled Italy and made his way to the United States, settling in Brooklyn. There, he quickly aligned himself with powerful figures like Salvatore Maranzano, a boss from his hometown who was engaged in a brutal war to control New York's mafia landscape. But what many don't realize is that years later, Bonanno would attempt his own power grab, plotting to assassinate Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese in an effort to seize control of the entire mafia. This conflict, known as the Castellammarese War, 1929 to 1931, saw Maranzano's forces clash with those of Giuseppe "Joe the Boss" Masseria. Bonanno, still in his early 20s, was a loyal soldier in Maranzano's ranks, proving his strategic mind and willingness to act decisively. When Masseria was assassinated in 1931, Maranzano declared himself capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses, but his reign was short-lived. Just months later, he was murdered in his own office, a hit orchestrated by Lucky Luciano, who sought to establish a more modern and democratic mafia structure. In the aftermath, Luciano formed the Commission, the governing body of the 5 families, and at just 26 years old, Joseph Bonanno was appointed boss of his own family, the youngest crime boss in history. As a boss, Bonanno distinguished himself from his contemporaries through a combination of discipline and discretion. While figures like Albert Anastasia and Vito Genovese thrived on public displays of brutality, Bonanno preferred to operate under the radar, expanding his family's influence through legitimate business fronts. His operations included gambling rings, narcotics trafficking, and even deep connections to heroin smuggling routes in Canada. Through these enterprises, he funneled illicit money while keeping law enforcement at bay. Under his leadership, the Bonanno family grew to be one of the wealthiest and most structured organizations in the underworld. Yet, despite his discipline, he allowed one of the most dangerous infiltrations in Mafia history. FBI agent Joseph Pistone, better known as Donnie Brasco, infiltrated his family so deeply that he was nearly inducted as a made man. Unlike his more flamboyant rivals, Bonanno was a firm believer in maintaining a low profile, but that didn't mean he wasn't feared. His ties to Sicilian heroin trafficking operations, made him one of the most powerful mafia figures in North America. He also expanded into Canada, controlling vast rackets in Montreal, a key hub for drug smuggling between Europe and the US. While the media dubbed him Joe Bonannos, a name he loathed, he saw himself as more than just a crime boss. He believed in the traditional Sicilian mafia's honor system and saw himself as the protector of the old ways. However, his obsession with maintaining control would lead to one of the most devastating internal conflicts in mafia history: the moment when he vanished for 19 months without explanation. Some claimed he was kidnapped, while others suspected he staged his disappearance to avoid an assassination attempt. By the early 1960s, Bonanno had ruled his family for over 3 decades, but his ambitions were growing bolder. He secretly plotted to overthrow bosses Tommy Lucchese and Carlo Gambino, aiming to seize complete control of the commission. When word of his plans leaked, the commission ordered his removal, leading to a shocking event in 1964. Bonanno disappeared. For 19 months, no one knew whether he had been kidnapped by his enemies, killed, or had gone into hiding. When he re-emerged in 1966, he claimed that he had been abducted by the Mafia, but had survived the ordeal. Many, however, suspected that he had faked his own disappearance to buy time and strategize his return. Upon his return, he found his family in chaos. His once loyal underboss, Gaspar Di Gregorio, had taken control of the organization with the commission's approval. What followed was a bloodbath, known as the Bonanno War. Factions within the Bonanno family engaged in open gunfights in the streets of Brooklyn and Queens, something previously unheard of in the Mafia's tightly controlled operations. Law enforcement, the media, and the public watched as a once powerful organization tore itself apart. Ultimately, Bonanno was forced into retirement in 1968, effectively ending his reign and setting the stage for the family's decline. Following Bonanno's retirement, the family never regained its former strength. While the other 4 Mafia families managed to adapt and recover from leadership changes, the Bonanno organization remained unstable. Its reputation within the underworld suffered, and the family became known for its betrayals and informants. This decline reached its lowest point in the early 2000s when its boss, Joseph Bonanno, did the unthinkable. He became the first sitting boss of a New York crime family to turn informant. Facing life in prison, Bonanno cooperated with the FBI, providing evidence that led to the convictions of numerous high-ranking mobsters. Despite all the bloodshed and betrayals, Joseph Bonanno lived longer than any other major mafia boss of his era. He died peacefully in 2002 at the age of 97, far removed from the world of crime he once dominated. He even wrote a memoir, A Man of Honor, an unprecedented move that enraged many in the underworld. The Bonanno family remains a cautionary tale, the first mafia family to implode from within, proving that sometimes the greatest threats come not from the outside, but from within one's own ranks.